Hi everyone, it's Chenzo from Reality Art Pod, here to talk about The Traitors Season 2, Episode 6, titled Backstab and Betrayal. Previously on The Traitors, Tamra was all out of opinions when she was murdered in the morning. Trishelle and Bergie found shield birds on the castle grounds. Peter hatched an elaborate plan to catch a traitor, and Janelle was banished, calling everyone idiots on the way out. The episode ended with the traitors in the turret settling on murdering shield holder Bergie. Before I dive in, if you like the content, don't forget to subscribe. Also, as always, I put a link in the subject so you can catch up on previous recaps. But let's dive into it. Right at the beginning of the episode, Alan tells us that the traitors tried to murder Bergie and it was blocked. The faithful trickle into breakfast. Sandra is excited that Phaedra is still alive. Phaedra is sad that they murdered Bergie-licious. Peter and Kevin come in and Dan tells them he thinks someone who voted for him at the round table will get murdered because it's an easy pin, with him really coming across as obviously a traitor here. Bergie is the last one in, and Peter knows that his plan worked. He says, mic drop. Peter tells Trishelle game on and that they just got him. It really seems they're talking about Dan. So Bergie-licious comes in holding the shield. Phaedra is so genuinely happy that B-licious is still alive. She says, like Jesus, he rose again. Sheree has no idea what's going on. Peter exposes his entire plan to the group at breakfast, telling them he lied to a few people. Sandra wants to know who. Parvati and Dan admit they were told the lie, but Dan says, but I'm not a traitor. Alan comes in a red kilt and cerulean top, socks, beret, and glasses to announce the challenge. In confessional, Dan admits he completely underestimated Peter and he got. This might be Dan's greatest strategic miscalculation of all time. Peter tells us he has it narrowed down between Parvati and Dan because they were the only ones who reacted at breakfast. Phaedra is going with the flow and not defending them at all. Parvati brings Peter, the traitor hunter, into the kitchen. She ends up just accusing Peter of being a traitor himself and leaving, which definitely doesn't help her to get Peter off her case. Dan meets with Peter and Dan seems to be doing a better job of misting Peter, or at least not accusing Peter of being a traitor. For the challenge, they need to find and carry a catapult's parts and a golden cannonball up a giant hill to assemble it and hit a target. Along the way, there are ammo boxes hidden that will help them to get a shield in the end. My first impression was that this challenge looked really hard. I didn't think they were going to achieve this. Kate says she hates this hill from last season. She wants to hang out in the castle and would rather sell a kidney to make 20 grand than do this. They cross a river. Sheree screams. Sandra almost gets swept away with the current. Trishelle sees a shield box and drags Kevin across the river to get it. That's Janelle's influence. They have to collect bags along the way, and Peter finds a second shield box. Sheree finds a box as well. CT, who is right in his element in this challenge, is doing a lot of work to carry the heavy stuff up the hill. Sandra and Parvati also end up finding boxes. So I thought they had to build the catapult, but they find most of the catapult built already. This challenge ends up being pretty much a guaranteed win for the group. Towards the end, whoever brings each shield box to the hay bale gets their chance at a shield. Kate brings Peter's box to the hay bale and sets it down for him. She could have claimed it for herself, but she chose peace and says fighting for a shield is desperate. They choose John to launch the catapult, which he says is the most exciting moment of his game so far, and they win the $20,000. They find out that in each of the ammo boxes is a cannonball that they get to launch, so everyone who found a box can launch at the target. Whoever's closest gets a shield. It doesn't really seem like they can re-aim the catapult, so Sheree ends up winning the shield by luck. On the car ride back to the castle, Kate thinks that the traitor is Parvati. Peter asks Parvati for the murder to be painless, and she confesses that Peter needs to get off her back. Back at the castle, Peter shuts Parvati out of a room to confer with the other faithfuls that Parvati is a traitor. Then they let her in and pretty much tell her they're all against her. Dan meets with Peter and some faithfuls again one-on-one before the round table to tell them that he has a name for a traitor that he's been keeping to himself for a while. They go to the round table. After awkward silence, Dan starts things off saying since day one he's been watching one person. Dan then turns into Jigsaw asking them, do you want to play a game?
Faithful, do you want to play a game? Raise your hand if your name has been written down.
Dan's suspect list starts with Bergie, Sheree, Phaedra, Sandra, and Parvati, whose names haven't been written down yet. Dan uses convenient logic to narrow it down to Parvati and Phaedra and singles out Phaedra as his target, who is clearly hurt by him and holding back tears. She eventually pulls it together and defends herself. Kate gets annoyed by Dan bringing up Phaedra's reaction to Bergie's attempted murder at breakfast. Kate says, not my Bergie-licious is offensive to you. Dan calls Phaedra extra, and Phaedra says, I do too much because you do too little. Phaedra takes the time to carefully eviscerate Dan with her words and remind him that Bergie voted for Dan last time, and then Bergie was attempted to be murdered. Basically, Dan throws Phaedra under the bus. Phaedra hijacks the bus and drives it over Dan. We get to the votes, and this was an interesting voting because because no faithfuls got votes. Dan votes for Phaedra. Peter votes for Parvati, basically telling the other faithfuls, let's not forget about Parvati. And then everyone else, including Phaedra and Parvati, vote for Dan. When John votes for Dan, he says treachery deserves to be punished by banishment and calls Dan the silent slaughterer. So Dan gets banished here, and this is the first time Dan has ever been voted out. Let's talk about Dan for a second. I feel like everyone I heard talk about this wanted Dan to be a traitor. I wanted Dan to be a faithful. I feel like he would have been a great traitor hunter, although probably would have been murdered because he's too good. Dan does great on Big Brother because he's actually a pretty passive player. He fades into the background at any given opportunity. He doesn't want to be in the spotlight. I feel like his method is very float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, waiting in the background, doing work behind the scenes, saving up social capital so that when the heat is on him, he can use it, then calling in all favors when his ass is on the line. I feel like that's what he was trying to do here, where this seemed to be him trying to recreate his Dan's Funeral 2.0, what with the round table pretty much being a house meeting. And if this was a cast with half rookies instead of all reality TV pros, I think this would have worked. The reality is Dan has never really played with a cast of heavy hitters before. He's been a big fish in a small pond, and I think he's like to keep it that way. I feel like this could be a really humbling experience for him, where he's been on this high horse for a while of I'm the person who wrote the book on winning reality TV. I hope that losing and failing at something doesn't demotivate him from continuing to try and be on different shows. Now there's less pressure to be perfect and more incentive to show up and have a little bit of fun. I do enjoy Dan as a TV character. I think he's definitely a great player, but I do think it would have been pretty boring for him to steamroll this and win. So Dan reveals he was a traitor, and they all celebrate and cheers their water to that. Dan says he made a huge mistake in going for Phaedra. In confessional, Trishelle says she felt like they were being fed a traitor by Dan, and now she thinks Phaedra is a traitor. Peter and his alliance, Bergie, Kevin, John, and Trishelle meet up, and Parvati comes in, calling them all out. Parvati has a new vendetta against Peter and wants to take him down. In the turret, Phaedra says she's pissed, and if she weren't a Christian woman, she would rip Dan's heart out. They consider who to murder, and Alan comes in and tells them they have the choice to murder or recruit. Parvati wants to recruit. She brings up Peter, and she thinks that she can get Peter to start murdering his friends. So they do invite Peter to be a traitor. Peter gets his recruitment letter. It's left up in the air whether he'll accept, but I think he'll accept. I think if you decline the invitation to get recruited, you're pretty much dooming yourself to be murdered. Especially Peter, who has proven himself to be such a great traitor hunter that a traitor can't have him in the game. I do think that Parvati has miscalculated this decision. Peter is not going to go after his friends. If anything, confirming to Peter who the other two traitors are only gives him more motivation to come after you harder with his friends. So I think Peter is still going to come for Phaedra and Parvati, even harder now. But that's all I have to say about this episode. Let me know in the comments. Do you think I'm right or wrong about Peter? You think he's going to murder his friends? Also, don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video. I'll be back next week to talk about more traitors. Until then, have a nice weekend. Bye.